Hi all, I'm Dr. Sujya, Assistant Professor in the Department of Computer Application at Dr. SNS Rajalakshmi College of Arts and Science. In Series 2 video, we are going to see is about the API documentation, where in Series 1 we have seen a brief description about what is an API. And in series 2, we are going to discuss is about the API documentation. API documentation is a set of instructions that tells the developers and other interested parties how to use other API and services for a specific end. And it usually contains codes, example, tutorial, and detail about the functions, classes, and return types. And it is especially provided developers with all the information they need to build or integrate with an API and make API calls with the software. And the API documentations clearly explains its endpoints, interrupts why you would want to use them, and give very specific examples on how you would want to use them. And it is important because it means developers don't have to keep building the same software solutions over and over from scratch. And API means developers can take advantages of other platforms that have already been created and integrated their functionality into their own programs. And it is a big platform for API, including Twitter and GitHub. Types of API, if we see the API is for team, for the partners, and for the end users. For the team, it is that is being designed for internal, that is for a company, and therefore it is intended to use only by the members of a team. And the purpose of this type of API would be a streamline the transfer of data between team and the system. And so the company's internal development are the ones who would be in charge of using this API. And for a partner, it is a shared outside the organizations, but only with those who have a business relationship with the company who will be provided with this API. And only authorized clients and access to this API, and consequences security measures tend to be more stringent with this type of API. And for the end users is an open API that can be used by any developers without any restrictions. And this type of API don't have particularly strict authentication and authorization measures that providers wants that API to be adopted by any developers as possible. And who writes API documentation is the developer that are ones who build the API that are often tasked with writing the documentation. Unfortunately, developers driven document can often be overly technical because developers are so close to the subject matter, and documentations written by developers may also fall by the wayside as developers are actually focused on building and maintaining the API. And for this reason, many companies employ professional technical writers to create this API documentation. And technical writers have the technical ability to understand the API and to create skills that to be able to write engaging content for end users who are the developers. An API developer supplies the technical writers with the information that tend to be able to document the API accurately. And what are the benefits of API? We see for providers who wants to offer an API, developing documentation can have many important benefits for the organization. Enhances the API developer experiences. First and foremost, the API documentation improves the developer experience. It doesn't matter how good your API is, its potential developers don't understand how to use it. Good API documentations help developers understand the different endpoints, and it offers an example of particular use cases. When you improve the developer experience, you increase the number of potential users you are able to attract to your product. Efficient product upkeep and faster updates. When you document your API effectively, it means you can manage the upkeep of your product and update it more frequently and quickly. With the API documentation, you know exactly what your product is meant to do and how it is supposed to help the end users. Aids both internal and external user comprehensions that API its capability. One of the main benefits of API documentation is help both the internal and external users to understand the API and what it can be used for and how it can be deployed and for the owners. And if you don't explain the potential capabilities of an API, then new users won't know how to use it until you experience slow product adaptations. And potential users of the API uses the documentation as a way to make the decisions whether or not to use the product. The structure of an API documentation is and design and function of it is first it's the outline. next is the tutorial, and next is the authentication, next is the endpoint definition, next is the status and error codes. Outline is knows about the overview, there is general overview or the summary of a API, and tutorial tells about the main part of API and its purpose, and authentications provides the data safety and for the developers as well as for the end users. Endpoint definitions are which is an API connects with the software program and the point in which the API interact with other systems. Status and error codes is used by the API to inform developers when an API is not performing as expected. And how to write your first API documentation is by recognizing the audience, then by creating a user journey map, next to start with guidelines for common scenarios, and finally we have to add samples of the code. Thank you. And call out error messages in status code and maintain your documentations. Thank you.